Alrighty, so good afternoon. My name is Derek Sanders. I'm the Sheriff of Thurston County. I appreciate each of you coming today to hear a little bit more about Marcia's story. I'd like to focus it on being her story and the life that she lived. And part of this discussion today will be the investigation where that took us over the last few weeks. So first off, I would like to thank a number of our partners. This investigation would not have been possible without them. We have JBLM, CID, Washington State Department of Corrections, King County Search and Rescue with some exemplary canines that they brought with them, Olympia Police Department, whose flock camera system actually helped solve this case, Idaho State Police, Missoula Police, Missoula County Sheriff's Office, the Washington State Patrol, who dedicated dozens of hours to our cause, the Thurston County Coroner's Office behind me, and the Thurston County Prosecutor's Office behind me. I wanted to go over a brief timeline of what happened so that people can start to plug in some of the reasons that thing happened and how quickly this case moved. On April 1st, Marcia Norman had dinner with her handyman, Jeffrey Zizz, who was the last known person to see her at that time. There was a delay in reporting. However, on April 4th at 13:48 hours, patrol deputies were dispatched via Marcia's neighbor and her son to the residence under suspicious circumstances of a missing person. On April 4th at 18:57 hours, detectives were requested to respond just a few hours later after the circumstances at her residence were not adding up. At 07:30 hours the next morning, detectives came back to the house and began investigating and securing some areas of interest. And also detectives interviewed Jeffrey the first time that basically detectives worked into that night, basically. So the first night they came out, they conducted some interviews. Jeffrey was cooperative at that time. And in that interview, you'll see the probable cause statement. He actually had a number of answers that made sense during the investigation, and the investigation was starting to stall out a little bit. However, Olympia's flock system, their ALPR camera system, was actually able to catch Mr. Zizz in a lie, and that's what propagated the investigation further and allowed the execution of numerous search warrants by our detectives. On April 5th, Jeffrey came to TCSO for a polygraph examination in which he failed extremely poorly. He is interviewed a second time, but at that point he requests an attorney. On April 5th in the afternoon, search warrants were applied for and executed. Jeffrey's truck was seized. His storage unit and trailer were also searched. On April 5th in the evening, Jeffrey's house and room were searched and items were seized, which included a 5-page letter which meticulously planned out a burglary and sexual assault of a woman who was referred to as his customer. On April 6th, detectives again were following up and checking suspicious areas and reviewing search warrant returns. On the morning of April 7th, the TCSO dive team searched the area of the victim's residence with a robot, a water sonar system, and a drone which was flown over the lake, and areas were checked, but nothing was found. At this time, in working with the Thurston County Prosecutor's Office, we sought a warrant for a probation violation from a previous child molestation case against Zizz, who we determined at this point in time, that same afternoon, he had fled the state with a roommate's truck. We later learned that that truck struck an elk near the Idaho-Montana border, and at that point we began mobilizing and asking for assistance from Idaho State Police and the Missoula law enforcement. On April 7th in the afternoon, special cadaver dogs from King County arrived and searched the shed property that detectives learned Jeffrey had built the day after Marcia's disappearance. The dogs showed some interest but did not give a clear yes or no at that time. Later that evening, we learned that Jeffrey was taken into custody with the assistance of Missoula law enforcement. On April 8th, that morning, cadaver dogs searched the victim's property and surrounding areas. Dogs indicated on human remains at the victim's house, and the WSP CSRT unit processed the suspect's truck for evidence. JBLM CID responded with a ground-penetrating radar device to check ground density and found an anomaly under the shed that Jeffrey had recently built. On April 8th, around noon, cadaver dogs searched the suspect's truck, and at that point in time, they indicated on human remains. On April 8th in the afternoon, cadaver dogs searched the shed property a second time, at which point 2 out of the 3 cadaver dogs indicated that human remains were likely present. On April 9th, with the help of numerous entities, the Thurston County Sheriff's Office lifted up the shed with power equipment, and TCSO detectives began digging, and at that point in time, we located human remains about 18 inches underground in a shallow grave with concrete poured over the top. On April 10th, an autopsy of those human remains was conducted by the Thurston County Coroner's Office. And the next day, those were confirmed to be the remains of Marcia Norman. On April 13th, Thurston County Sheriff's Office extradited Zizz back to Thurston County Jail, where he remained on a no-bail hold for his probationary sentence violation. And on April 20th, Zizz was booked for murder first degree, kidnapping first degree, and unlawful disposal of human remains. One of the interesting things about cases like this is that our Thurston County detectives oftentimes spend a lot of time getting to know the family. I spoke with the family a little bit as well, and the one thing that came up numerous times was how great of a person Marcia was, how she was the life of the room everywhere she went, and how she was the glue for her family. And so I wanted that to be one of the strongest statements that we have here today, is the focus on the victim, and that she did not deserve the details that you're going to learn about here in a short moment. I would also like to just thank each of our patrol deputies and detectives. You know, these are cases where any point in time, even the smallest slip up can result in not finding evidence, not taking things seriously, brushing things off, and at no point in time did any of that occur. I think they all acted with significant professionalism and dedication to the job, and I think this is a good example of how we can't bring Marcia back, but we can seek out justice for her family. At this point in time, I'm going to hand it over to Coroner Gary Warnock, and then move on to Prosecutor John Thunheim before taking questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Gary Warnock, and I'm the coroner here in Thurston County. I'm going to give you the cause of death statement. Before I do, I want to thank the Norman family and their friends for their help and cooperation for all of us involved in locating Marcia, and just say our thoughts are with you all. I take no pleasure in delivering the following message because it's going to sting. The immediate cause of death for Marcia is combined blunt force and penetrating sharp force injuries of the head. Other significant conditions contributing to Miss Norman's death were multiple blunt force injuries to her torso and extremities. The autopsy examination revealed the injuries were the result of being assaulted by another person, and that the injuries were inflicted while Miss Norman was alive. This was a very complex investigation, which is still ongoing. In our line of work, we see and witness many things, and this investigation is one you cannot unsee. I've been with the coroner's office for nearly 25 years, with 19 years as the coroner, and this is the worst case I've witnessed. John?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Thunheim. I'm the prosecuting attorney here in Thurston County. I'm going to join my two colleagues in sending our deepest condolences to the family. One of my deputy prosecutors and victim advocate and I had a chance to sit down with the family today and talk to them prior to the court appearance that you were there present earlier, and heard very much the same things that you've already heard about Marcia, including what a tremendous family person she was, how she loved her family, how her family loves her, her love of music and art and traveling, and the list goes on and on. She was very clearly a vibrant and thriving person. And I think we all, the entire community, is mourning her loss as we speak. As you've heard, today was Mr. Zizz's first court appearance, a preliminary appearance. We started consulting in this case back when the sheriff's office identified Mr. Zizz as a person of interest, as you've heard. When we learned that he potentially had fled the state, we applied for and obtained a warrant for his arrest to try to have him arrested on violation of his prior sentence, which he was serving as a treatment sentence from a prior offense. So that warrant was immediately issued and provided the basis for the Missoula authorities to make the arrest that they did at the time. Since then, we've continued to consult with the sheriff's detectives and ultimately determined that we were ready to proceed forward with charges of murder in the first degree, kidnapping in the first degree, and unlawful disposal of human remains, which is why we sought today probable cause for those offenses. We now have until the close of business on Wednesday to formally file those charges, and I expect that to happen sometime within the next 2 days. Following that, there will be an arraignment scheduled on May the 6th at 9 in the morning. At that arraignment, the judge will formally advise Mr. Zizz of the charges that have been brought against him. He will enter an initial plea to those charges, and assuming that that plea is not guilty, then the court will proceed forward with setting additional hearings, including an omnibus hearing, a trial confirmation hearing, and a trial. And that initial trial setting will be within 60 days of the date of arraignment. So probably sometime in early July would be my prediction. That trial date, I know, as you all know, is subject to change as the investigation continues and the lawyers begin preparing the case for trial. We will continue to work with the sheriff's office. This is still a continuing investigation. There is evidence that has been collected that will be going to the crime lab for analysis, and so as that develops, we'll be continuing to analyze that evidence and review the charges. The charges that we anticipate filing in the next two days are not necessarily the final charges. They are the first set of charges, and we'll continue to evaluate the case to determine if different or additional charges are appropriate. I think that would end my initial statement, and we can start with some question and answers. And as Tara indicated, we'd like you, if you have a question for one of us, to identify which you are asking the question to so that we can respond accordingly.
Sheriff, any indication why this happened? It went from a dinner that sounds like she invited him to dinner, made him dinner at her home. He was a welcome guest there, and then she's horribly beaten to death. What happened?
Well, it's hard to always come up with a motive. We find a lot of things in law enforcement. You usually find out who, what, when, where, how. Why is something that we don't always get an answer to. But if I had to guess at this point in time, it's because the suspect we have in custody is a violent person.
Sheriff, what do we know about who was supervising him on his community custody, and is there any prior violations while he's been out?
I do not know of any violations that have occurred. I believe it would be the Washington State Department of Corrections.
The letter that was found for a customer, anything that happened in the letter that also we believe evidence shows happened in this case?
There are similarities.
Can you expand on that?
That part we're still investigating. And again, this, just because Mr. Zizz is in custody and charges are being filed, detectives have a lot of follow-up to do on this case. The letter that they uncovered is extremely disturbing.
Yeah, where her remains were found, was that his property or a friend's property or her property? I was kind of confused on that.
Totally separate property that he was also conducting business on.
Was that here in Thurston County?
It was.
Was it his property or separate?
Yeah,
Not his,
yeah, correct.
Not her, somebody else.
Correct. Yeah, third party.
Can you talk about the flock system? I don't know if a lot of people know what that is. It's a Olympia PD thing, how that was, what it is and how it kind of helped with the case.
Yeah, so flock cameras are automated license plate reader cameras, and essentially they provide two separate functions. The first is that they can provide real-time hits for law enforcement. So as cars drive through there, let's say a stolen vehicle drives through an intersection, the camera will read the plate and send a hit to all the working law enforcement officials so that they know there's a stolen car in the area. The second function that the LPR cameras have is that they have a retention period. And so law enforcement can go back in time and say, hey, we want to look for this specific vehicle, this make, this model, this license plate, and we want to see if this vehicle was driving during these parameters. And so in this case, it was extremely helpful because whereas Mr. Zizz stated that he was home the night that Marcia went missing, we actually had conflicting information when his truck was located on a flock camera. And so that was the first step in which we were able to put him into a lie and then expand further and dig further.
Sheriff, obviously, this is a really disturbing case, and we heard in court today from Marcia's family that she was very well known in Tenino. I mean, as a sheriff, what's your message there to people in Tenino who are rightly disturbed by all this?
Well, this is a disturbing case. I also think that there's some solemnness in swift justice. So the speed at which Thurston County Sheriff's Office and the prosecutor's office and the coroner's office were able to identify a suspect, get a suspect in custody, and get charges filed, I think also goes to show that we're hoping the days of all these cold cases are over, and that it's extremely hard to get away with something like this in Thurston County these days.
Is he being looked at for any other outstanding cases? There's Nancy Moyer missing out of Tenino, and any other cases that are being looked at?
That follow-up investigation will be done.
Was there any evidence to suggest this was premeditated? Did he buy anything prior to that dinner? Can you explain maybe some of the...
Well, I won't compound on that if the prosecutor wants to chime in on that. I believe that part of the murder first degree piece comes also with some of the cause of death issues. When you see the traumatic injuries that occurred, and knowing that she was alive for those injuries, I think that's where a lot of that murder first degree piece comes in. And like the prosecutor said, those charges could increase to aggravated murder at a later date. It could go down to murder second, but what we're trying to do is use the probable cause that we have, the evidence that we have today, to get this case rolling, and that investigation will continue.
I have a question about the wounds. Is there a weapon that you were seeking or have gotten into evidence?
I will let the coroner answer that question.
What's that again?
Is there a weapon that you're seeking in relation to these wounds? Like you said, a sharp?
There's sharp force injuries and there's blunt force trauma. For the blunt force trauma, there is no pattern to say what device was used. So it could be a piece of lumber, machinery. As far as the sharp force injuries, pneumatic nailer. And I'm going to back up a little bit. Her onset from injury to death was not instant, it was hours. So these injuries compounded and reoccurred while she was still alive.
Do we know where that happened?
No,
You found the location?
I'm not aware, Drew, of a location yet.
And just to be clear, do we think she was deceased when she was placed in that shallow grave?
Yes,
So just for the timelines for Warnock, so the nail gun, that was used hours before she died, what you believe?
it was used in the progression of the assault. So it wasn't an instantaneous death.
And I'll just add to that, because Drew, your original question had to do with premeditation, and that was the theory on which we presented the murder one charge to the judge for probable cause, was that there was clearly time during the course of the events, based on the nature of the injuries that have been described, for the intent to kill to form. And the definition of premeditated is thinking about it beforehand, or that the intent forms prior to the act. And so we felt like there was sufficient time based on those injuries to move forward with that charge that, in fact, we believe we can prove premeditated murder.
Would you call this a torture, and was she tortured?
I think that her injuries could be consistent with torture. It's hard, it's hard to say based on what we know right now that that was exactly what happened. But because these injuries happened over a course of time, I think that's a possible inference from the evidence. But I'm not ready to say that conclusively.
But accurate to say she suffered for hours leading up to. Yes.
That's the coroner and the pathologist who did the examination indicated that there was time that elapsed while these injuries were being inflicted.
Was she also sexually assaulted, as the letter said it was a burglary sexual assault plan?
You want to address that, Gary?
So, there is no evidence of a sexual assault, but those, that testing hasn't come back yet. So we're still, that's all pending right now.
Where was he found? As far as like he was hiding in the woods, or I don't remember if I read that.
Missoula area law enforcement did a great job. We knew that he was heading east, and we knew that he was on foot after, it sounds like he crashed into an elk. And so the Missoula area law enforcement went hotel by hotel until they found him. And at that point, I believe they preemptively started the SWAT team at that point and took him into custody at an area hotel.
You mentioned that the flock system causes in a line, and then you mentioned the polygraph test as well. Was there anything additional from that test that helped you solve the case?
From the polygrapher test, not to my knowledge, no. But once he failed the polygraph, he left the state.
The paperwork details this incident a couple of months ago where he broke into her home. Hindsight's 20/20, but you would have liked to have known about that prior. I mean, when you heard that it happened.
Certainly, and I'm not going to second guess what was going through the family's mind or Marcia's mind at that point in time. But yeah, I mean, if someone breaks into your house and is standing over you, we would like to know that. But again, it's always tough to know exactly what was going on in their minds at the time and how they perceived that. So.
Despite that, she trusted him, though, and
Yeah.
had him back.
Were there any other red flags that the family or neighbors had identified with this man?
Not particularly with this man. Mostly just with the manner in which Marcia went missing. There were a lot of red flags. When we were going through the house, things were basically just left at a point in time. Dishes in the sink, bed made. No, I mean, I believe everything was still at her residence, including her vehicles, except for her phone. So the only two things that were missing were her and the phone. So obviously that's not normal. The family correctly identified how abnormal that was and worked quickly to get that information to us.
Was the house broken into?
No signs of a disturbance.
Was she coaxed out somehow, or like, hey, come with me somewhere, or forced her to go to another area from the home?
Well, that part I believe is still under investigation, but he was invited into the home, if that's what you're asking. So this was a scenario where he was a welcome guest inside the residence, but we don't know exactly what happened in those final moments.
No signs of trauma at the house as far as broken things or blood or anything?
No. Some tire marks leaving the driveway, but that also made the investigation initially very challenging for detectives. Yes, sir.
Do you know if Marcia or the family were aware of his criminal history prior to this?
We don't. I don't know is that they were aware of his criminal history. Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone here coming today. And again, our focus moving forward is going to be on Marcia, the life she lived, her family, who's going to continue to live in her name, and the investigation between these three offices that ensures that justice is sought for her. Thank you.